Thank you for listening this episode of Coding Talks. Myself Vishnu. I'm a .NET programmer from Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala state, which is on the southern part of India. And Coding Talks is a podcast which is available on all leading podcast platforms, and in each episode I try to present some of the programming topics in an easy to understand manner so that someone can benefit from this, whether they are an experienced programmer or even for a beginner. It doesn't matter. Today in this episode, we will be looking on the newest version which is released by Microsoft for developing application, which is the .NET 6. I will try to cover some of the interesting features of .NET 6 as well as the newest IDE which Microsoft released, which is the Visual Studio 2022. Last 2 weeks ago, one of my colleague has mentioned about this newest version of Visual Studio. So I also got an notification about this release, but I was a bit lazy. But when he mentioned, I tried to install that, and we had one of the projects which we were developed using the earlier version of .NET, which is the .NET 5. And as there were not any breaking changes, it was very easy to migrate that to .NET Core as well. And I found it very interesting. And the thing is, like, we had a bit of container applications that were running inside AKS and that were having support for .NET 5. But with when Microsoft released this newest version of the .NET Core 6, there is no .NET Core. Actually, simply we call that as .NET 6. They made it a point so that they given a long stand support for this new version, as well as they have partnered with the different testers as well as different organizations, and already many of the organizations were migrated that, and that made a much wider acceptance of this new platform. And already all the different cloud services are already integrated that into their ecosystem as well. So that means that if you have an existing .NET 5 application, you are ready to go ahead with the .NET 6, because that is the preferred way for developing future applications. And not just future, if you have an existing .NET 5 application, and you can do an easy migration as well, because there are no breaking changes at all. So that made very interesting for me about this .NET 6, and that's why I doing this podcast. And on the upcoming day, on coming Wednesday, today is 6th of December 2021, and 2 days later I plan to have an YouTube session on the .NET 6, which I plan to show some of the demo using Visual Studio, live demo using Visual Studio, and that will be available on my YouTube channel. So if you are listening this podcast a bit later, you can have that you can view that from my YouTube channel as well. So my YouTube channel is Coding Talks with Vishnu, and that will be also available on YouTube. So not only that, I was regularly conducting the YouTube sessions for past 1 year and more. So already there were a lot of sessions that covered different aspects of programming as well as different cloud services that are related to Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services. That also is there, and you can check all my previous episodes, whether that in that YouTube channel or that in the podcast as well. In podcast also there are a lot of past episodes as well, so you can check that as well. And myself, I am a .NET programmer. I am from Thiruvananthapuram, and I have experience working with different cloud vendors as well as different kind of enterprise applications. And I like to share my experience all through this podcast and YouTube channel. And I am also an AWS community builder as well. This year, Amazon has selected me for the community builder program, and I am a community builder as well. So feel free to check out my YouTube channel as well as my podcast. And we can straight away, we can now go to the .NET 6, which is the topic of this particular podcast. So as myself a .NET programmer, so like myself, everyone who are already developing in the .NET platform, they can usually start the .NET 6 by installing the Visual Studio 2022. But Visual Studio 2022 is not a mandatory requirement for .NET 6, because .NET 6 is actually a cross-platform language, which is a unified language that can support different kinds of targets, whether you are developing a mobile application or if you are developing a Windows application or console application or whatever kind of application. You can feel that, okay, there is one single version called the .NET 6, and you can confidently use that for all your future applications without need to bother about the different versions. So you know that if you were working in .NET in the earlier years, you feel a bit challenged because you might have felt a bit challenged because there were different versions like the .NET Core. I am saying about the pre-era before .NET Core, like the .NET Framework era, where we have different versions like the .NET Framework 1 or 2 or something like that, and up to 4.5 or 4.6, and all. Even in those framework versions, there were minor versions as well. So 4.6.1 or something. So you have to by heart all the different versions especially when developing different targets, because the underlying APIs were entirely different. So if you were developing a cloud application, or if you were developing a mobile or web application, you have to be careful about the underlying API which you were selecting. So different versions were there, and that made a bit challenge for the developers. Especially this happens like if you have a solution with a lot of projects which were targeting multiple targets, like the console application or Windows application or the web application. Usually you have to be a bit careful about what all the different versions, underlying versions, framework versions you were using at those times. And when this became a problem, especially for sharing code between multiple projects. So usually the one principle in software development is like, do not repeat yourself. So if you have a common logic that should be shared across different projects, in those days it found a bit challenge because the different targets and the versions don't match that much efficiently. So to avoid that problem, Microsoft had come up with a new standard called the .NET Standard, and many of you who may be familiar with the .NET Standard, like the .NET Standard can some extent bring this unification of different platform, so that if you want to share code between the different targets or different projects inside a single solution, you can create a library, a base class library using the .NET Standard, so that particular standard version can more support different targets rather than the .NET Framework itself. So .NET Standard can bring some form of where I managed to bring some form of unification in API. And after that, some years later, the .NET Core had come up, because the earlier model of Microsoft were particularly tied to the Windows, and you need a Windows system for running the .NET application. But as things evolved, Windows is no longer the marketing strategy of Microsoft, and what they are focusing now is more on the cloud services. So they were adopting a kind of an open source model, and that bring out the .NET Core into the highlight, and they created the .NET Core version, which can support multiple platforms like the Windows, Linux or Mac, and that way you can create a .NET Core application. Like it started with the .NET Core 1 and then 2, 3 and so on, and you can easily create a .NET Core application, and you can develop applications for different platforms, whether it's a Linux or Mac or Windows. So with a runtime, with a .NET Core runtime, any of the applications you were developing using the .NET Core can run on multiple platforms. So that were much better than the earlier versions of .NET framework, which were tied to a particular version. So again, after some time, Microsoft thought about unifying all the different platforms. So now the cloud and the cloud services are getting more popular, and there are a lot of IoT devices in place. So not only the cloud, web or mobile, now the IoT applications are also getting popular. So that means that there is a need occurred for having a common language or a common version that can support multiple targets, whether it be a cloud, mobile, web or IoT or whatever upcoming targets as well. So we need a common version of language to support all that, because that way sharing code can be possible without the need to think about the different versions and their compatibility. So that way Microsoft they started this in .NET 5, which were released in 2020 November. And their idea was to bring a unification of all these different platforms into a single one, and that started with the .NET 5. But actually we can say that with the recent release of .NET 6, that unification is now almost done, because they were managed to create a single base class library with a single set of APIs that can target all the different platforms and all the different required features which we need for our application will be adding through the NuGet packages. So the base class library they have unified with the .NET 6. They already unified that to some extent with the .NET 5, but now the unification is almost complete. And also we can say that there is a single SDK now. So that means that when you are going forward, when you want to create a .NET application, it will be ideal to create that in .NET 6. So there won't be any we can simply call that as .NET 6, and there is no need to call that as .NET Core 6. So that way they have simplified, and this particular release is a kind of unified version, we can say, that can target all the different platforms. So unified in the sense that you can use this language for creating a web application. You can use this same language for creating a mobile or a Windows or a console application. And if you want to create some applications for cloud, whether it be an Azure function or something, you can use that as well. And if you want to develop applications which target container mode of deployment, you can feel free to use the new version as well, because already I have played with the Azure Kubernetes services containers, and all the different underlying containers are now supporting .NET 6 in place, and also Azure Function is also having support for .NET 6. So that means that newer versions can have a well support with the .NET 6. And also Microsoft is saying that they will be having a predictable releases every year with the .NET 6. So now nearly around 1 month before the .NET Core is released, .NET 6 is released, and now upcoming November next year they will be releasing the next version of .NET, which is maybe the .NET 7. unless there won't be any change, or after that in 2023 or something, they will be having another release. So that means that there is a predictable release that is going to happen every time. And this .NET 6 is having a long-term support from Microsoft as well. So that means that all your existing applications, if you have a existing .NET 5 applications, it will be good to migrate that to .NET 6, because there is no breaking changes, and majority of the time the migration will be easy. So the step for migration will be like you can open your existing .NET 5 application, in preferably with the Visual Studio 2022. I haven't tried that with the Visual Studio Code, but that is also possible. So you can open that in Visual Studio 2022, your existing .NET 5 project, and then you can simply change the target to .NET 6. And that's done. That the half part is done. Then the next part you may need to do is like your application, your project may be using a lot of NuGet dependencies. So you have to update your NuGet dependencies also. What you can do is like once you change the framework and you compiled all your code, next you can do is like you can right click on your project and you open the manage NuGet packages and click on the update tab. So if you are using a set of NuGet packages, and if your application if your NuGet packages as a recent release, then automatically that will be highlighted on the updates tab, and you can simply click on the different packages updates, wait for some time, and then that means the migration, once that is completed, that means the migration is done. So that is the way by which that is the step which you have to follow for migrating an existing .NET 5 application to .NET 6, and it will be better to migrate all the existing application and all the future applications which you will be developing, whether it's an enterprise application or even for your own personal project. It is recommended to use .NET 6 because it will be having a long-term support, as well as some of the new features of C# 10, as well as some of the new features that are come pre-built with the Visual Studio, new Visual Studio 2022 IDE. You can experience that with the .NET 6. So it will be good to migrate or create applications in .NET 6. Not only that, there are a lot of performance improvements as well, especially when it comes to file reading, then the collections part and all. Lot of different features. So I will try to share some of the features that I felt or what I have understood when working with the .NET 6. So I will come up to particularly to the .NET 6 part a bit later. But before that, I will like to mention what I felt when I opened the new Visual Studio 2022 IDE. Because usually I personally prefer the Visual Studio 2022 for developing applications, because that will be having a more better support for developing different kinds of applications. You can have that with the Visual Studio Code as well. Many developers are fans of Visual Studio Code as well. Visual Studio Code is actually lightweight, and it's nearly around the 40 MB below size as well, and it's a cross-platform support as well. And you don't need that much resource, computer intensive resource for running Visual Studio Code. So many developers, especially the JavaScript developers or React or Angular developers or even .NET Core developers, prefer to use the Visual Studio Code. But Visual Studio 2022 is also another kind of a professional edition where you can do more. I feel much easier than the Visual Studio Code. That is purely my personal opinion. Then the other thing which you can notice is like if you are a freelancer, or if you are a person who want to learn Visual Studio or experience Visual Studio 2022 in your own laptop, you can have a community edition as well. So you can download the community edition and can install freely in your laptop. So community Community Edition is actually a full-fledged professional kind of version which have all the different things, but the only catch is that you can't use that for creating a kind of an enterprise level application. So enterprises usually use the Visual Studio or Enterprise Edition. So that's the pricing model. But for those who want to learn they can use the Visual Studio Professional as well. But that's not mandatory for using Visual Studio 2022 is not mandatory for using the .NET 6 or C# 10. You can have Visual Studio Code as well, but that's a matter of personal preference. So when I opened Visual Studio 2022, what I felt is like an entire revamp of the look and feel of the design. And when I gone through their documentation, I found that they made the application in a new way. They made this IDE in a entirely new way, so that it makes the developer into the zone. So zone means that once you start developing an application, you should focus, you need to focus on that particular coding, and you want to avoid the distraction. So the design of the Visual Studio 2022 IDE is focused on avoiding distraction. So they have revamped the different icons. Then they were using a new set of fonts. And another thing is, like, if you have a solution with multiple projects, then you can have the option to colorize the tabs as well. So that means that if you have a solution with the project 1 and another solution with the project 2, Visual Studio will be able to highlight the difference using the tabs. So that is an option you should enable. So once you enable that option, it will be highlighted there. Then another thing which I noticed when using the Visual Studio 2022 is the IntelliSense. The IntelliSense is much improved, and auto highlighting of code, auto IntelliSense of code. That means even if you simply create a class inside the Visual Studio 2022, you can feel how the Visual Studio is suggesting to create the different properties, and it's not just tied up with showing a predefined kind of a suggestion. It's like actually reading that particular file. For example, when I tried to play along, I created a class called the message DTO class, and when I tried to create a property, it's interesting to see that Visual Studio highlighted that with the property called property space that int space that property name. Automatically the ID first one, usually the property will be an ID, so that will be highlighted. And the second one is very interesting, like when I try to create the second property, it automatically suggested based on the file name I have, that is the message DTO, so it shows like message or something. So that is interesting. And similar way, if you have a collection, when I had a collection that holds some record, immediately underneath that, when I tried the for keyword, it automatically highlighted the rest of the code, like for where item in that particular collection, and it automatically created all the required naming convention as well. So that you can experience when using the Visual Studio 2022. It's using some kind of an Azure service behind the scene to actually go through the code and highlight some of the IntelliSense so that you can easily develop. So many times you can feel that you can simply create a DTO class or a simple class even without typing anything. You can simply click on the tab so that the auto suggestions will be applied, and you can simply go through. And many times it certainly eases your development, and it also highlights some of the syntax errors as well, and also lot of other features that are part of Visual Studio 22. You can also experience when you actually go developing an application. One thing is like the using statement. So usually If you have a common set of using statements at top of every file, you can minimize that. You can avoid that entirely. You can simply create a new common global using a file or something, a global file, like using directives or something, and the name is not important. You can use whatever name you like. So simply create a new file, and if you have a common set of using statements that you were using across different files, what you can do is you can simply cut all the different using statements from all those files, and you can simply copy and you can simply paste that in this new file which you created, and simply append your existing using directives with a global keyword. So once you applied the global keyword, what that means is like all the namespace that are defined using the global or prefixed with the global will be available across the project. So that is also very interesting. And another one is like the implicit usage of global. Like if you have a project, you can avoid some extent some of the different commonly used system namespaces. What you can do is like you can unload your project and you can add an implicit declaration, implicit XML node on that property file, so that you can have the details from the documentation. So once you add that, and if you reload the file, you can see that many of the commonly used system names using statements will be showing as not required, because you already applied that in the project using the implicit declaration, and automatically behind the scene Visual Studio will automatically create a actual using statement using file behind the scene with the global prefix, so that it will be applied to across the different documents. So that is another interesting thing which I noticed. Then there are a lot of other interesting features as well, like the hot reload. So that is a very interesting feature. Like if you were developing an application and if you want to change something, and if you want to see how that change is actually applied to your code, many times you would need to restart your code earlier. But with the help of this hot reload, you can use you can change your code without stopping the code at all. So that means that if you have an ASP.NET Core application or a Blazor or a Windows application or a console application or even an Azure function, if you're running that and if you want to see some change, you can straight away change that in code, and you can click on, you can save the code, or you can click on the reload button on top, which is very next to that debug button, and if you click that reload, it immediately the changes will be applied without any restart at all. So that means that many times your development time can be reduced to a great extent with the help of this. So this hot reload is very interesting. So you can enable this on save as well, so that once you make a change to a particular document while it is running, immediately on the save, that changes will be applied. So that option can be enabled from the options tab, and this also works with the Visual Studio Code as well. So you can use that for the CLI tool as well. So about how to configure this hot reload is very simple. That is available on the documentation. You use a combination of the .NET and a Watch tool, so that once you make the changes, it will be immediately reflected. Then to have this full support for this hot reload and this IntelliSense, your application must be in .NET 6. So it will be preferred to use the .NET 6 version for all your future, or as far as possible try to migrate that to .NET 6. And the other things which I notice is like, yeah, the interface is greatly improved. A new set of font is what the Microsoft is using now for the Visual Studio. So it looks entirely different than the color tablet. Then the support for JIT is also very interesting. Like if you have a solution with the two projects and the two projects were targeting a entirely different JIT repo. So multi-JIT repo is supported now. So you should enable that option. I think that is in preview, but you can experience that using the Visual Studio 2022. So that means if you have a solution with the two projects, each targeting a different repository, you can make changes on each projects, and then you can, using a single commit, update that to multiple repos. So that is also a new feature they have introduced. Then other than that, all the different features of C# 10 has been included with the .NET 6 and the .NET the Visual Studio as well. That means the one thing which you can notice very easily is like if you open the ASP.NET Core web application, you can see that if you are creating a new ASP.NET Core web application, you can see that the startup file is now not there. So that is because using that C# new features, the code is much reduced and there is no need for a startup class, and everything is included in the .NET in the program.cs file, and the code inside the program.cs is reduced to a great extent, and you can easily add the middleware very easily using the new syntax, and that about how to add the different pipelines and all, and the middlewares and all that you can get from the documentation. But the interesting thing is like with the new feature of C# 10, the code has been greatly reduced so that the startup file is not required at all. And if you are creating a new application, a new ASP.NET Core application in Visual Studio, you can see very clearly see that the startup is not there at all. So that is one thing which you can see. And another thing is like you were thinking, what about if I have an existing .NET 5 application which have a startup file as well as a .NET as well as a program.cs? What will happen if I migrate? Should that startup .cs will be eliminated? Actually, the answer is no. You can have the startup.cs and the program.cs convention as well, and for all the newly created application, or if you want to manually change that, you can have that option as well. But that is not a mandatory. You can have both files as well. So that won't be a problem when you migrate the existing application. Your migrated applications will be having those files as well. And if you want to prefer the startup way of doing, then that way also you can work on. But that is not required because the newer templates which they have updated, that won't include the startup file. So you can experience that if you try that by creating a new application. And the Bootstrap 5.1 and a new Angular template is also updated, and all the different client-side libraries like the React and all that has been updated with a new template. And the SAML experience is also greatly improved. So a lot of bugs has been fixed. Then another thing which Microsoft highlights in their documentation when it comes with the Visual Studio 2022 is the support for the 64-bit. So earlier, some customers were experiencing some crash or something when they were using multiple projects inside Visual Studio because of the memory limit they had before. So what Microsoft had done is like partnered with the different processor developers, processor vendors and all. They have even partnered with the Apple. So if you go through the documentation about the performance improvement, which is written by a person called Stephen, that will be available on the Microsoft blog. So actual title of the document is like blog is like performance improvements in .NET 6. I recommend you to go through that particular blog by Stephen. So that highlights some of the performance improvements that they had made in the .NET 6. So lot of performance improvements are there, but the main thing that the document is highlighting is like one is the compilation time, then the other thing is like the file reading time. Like the file reading class is entirely rewritten to a great extent, and the collections, its run collections, its manipulation and all that part also a great deal of changes is there. So it's a lengthy document, so if you go through that you can understand what all improvements are made. Also Microsoft has released another blog called the announcing .NET 6, which is the blog which released along with the .NET 6. So it features some of the great highlights which Microsoft is saying about the .NET 6. One is like this particular version is production and it is stress tested with different Microsoft services internally as well as by other companies, and you can view some of the links as well which Microsoft shared in that particular document blog. I will paste all that underneath the notes in the podcast so that you can go through that. In case if you're not able to view that particular show notes which I pasting, still you can easily identify that. Simply search on announcing .NET 6 and Google will show that particular blog which Microsoft released. So the title is like announcing .NET 6. Announcing .NET 6. So if you type that, you will be able to navigate to a dev blog which is released by Microsoft. So they are mentioning that this .NET 6 is actually safe to go because it is actually production stress tested with the different Microsoft services, and not only internally by Microsoft, they have also tested with other companies as well. And it has a long-term support, like around 3 years the support will be there. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a unified platform that supports the browser application, cloud, desktop, IoT and mobile application, and you can use the same .NET 6 for different platforms, and you will have the ability to share code very easily. Then performance is greatly improved, and especially the file input output, its general, the performance is greatly improved, and a lot of the newest features of C# 10, like the record stacks, the implicit using, which I mentioned earlier, like if you add an implicit using inside your project file, you can avoid the need for repeated using the namespace, the using statements. Then the new lambda capabilities and lot of F# 6 features has also been added. Then the hot reload is a very interesting thing and very helpful for their developers. Then the cloud diagnostics has been improved. And then the JSON APIs have a more higher performance because they are using a new source generator for the serializing. Then a new way of APIs has been introduced. So with the .NET 6, a web developer will be able to develop the web application, and that is usually called as ASP.NET Core. And when it comes to .NET Core 6, we can simply say like a .NET 6 or ASP.NET Core 6 to be precise. And using this ASP.NET Core, we will be able to create an MVC application, Racer applications, then Blazor. Blazor is actually a client-side application which you can develop using the C#. So Microsoft has released that nearly around 3 years back, and now it is constantly getting momentum. The advantage of using Blazor is like it's actually a web assembly, and if you have expertise or expertise in the sense if you have some familiarity with the C#, you will be able to develop the Blazor applications which can target the different browsers. So actually it's like you can eliminate the need for learning a language like JavaScript or React or something. You can develop entirely a web application, a client-side web application using Blazor. So that is what Microsoft plan to improve, and they are constantly spending a lot of effort in this Blazor. So that Blazor also has a lot of improvements, and HTTP 3 support has been added to the ASP.NET Core, so that it can interact with the HTTP clients. And the greatest improvement is the file input, and entirely they have rewritten the file input output class, so that the performance will be greatly improved, and that is highlighted by that blog which is written by Stephen, so you can check that as well. Then a lot of different support, and actually because this is Microsoft has planned to support this long term, they already included this particular support for the .NET in their applications, in their cloud services like the Azure App Service, Azure Functions, as well as the Azure Static Web Apps as well. So this with the .NET 6 is now in general available, is generally available, and it's already all the different services inside the Azure as well as AWS has been included with the .NET 6. So that means that if you have an existing .NET 5 that is following a kind of a container based deployment model, you can migrate that to .NET 6 as well, because the containers inside the Azure, like the AKS, or even if it is inside the Amazon, like the EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Services, or even inside the G-Cloud or something, still you can have the support for .NET 6 as well. And Azure Functions, if you are using Azure Functions with .NET 5, that also is already migrated to .NET 6, so that you can have your applications, you can have your Azure Functions migrate that as well to the .NET 6. So that means it will be good to move ahead to .NET 6, because you will get additional support. Then I think I have covered almost all the major things which I am just thinking about whether I missed anything in particular or not. Yes, I think, yeah, these are all the important things that I want to highlight. And there is an update coming for the new Xamarin as well. So Xamarin is a framework which is used for creating the mobile application, native mobile applications using C#. So if you are a C# developer, you can easily pick up the Xamarin framework to develop applications that can target iOS and Android. So this is actually a native mobile app. So once you develop an application in Xamarin, you can test that in emulator using the Android or iOS emulator, and then you can deploy that to the particular platform as well. So I have developed on such a kind of application. So the one thing which you can notice in Xamarin is like the code sharing between the Android and iOS will happen automatically. So you can write your mobile application using Xamarin framework using C#, which has a set of controls, and automatically Xamarin will automatically convert that to whatever platforms you are targeting. So there were support for Windows as well, but now Windows Phone is not active. So the other platforms like the Windows and the iOS is now supported. Automatically the Xamarin framework will convert your code to those underlying platforms. So if you have a say example, if you have a menu that you are creating using Xamarin, automatically the Xamarin will be converting that to iOS specific menu as well as for Android specific menu behind the scenes. So there will be, I learned that there will be an update coming for the Xamarin as well. So going forward, the Xamarin will be called as MAUI. So that is the way which I pronounce MAUI. So that's the new integrated platform. That's the future Xamarin. So that will be used for creating applications for a native mobile application. We can expect that soon. If you are interested in learning more about that MAUI, which the upcoming one, you can check that as well. Then the next thing is like there are a lot of what I plan to cover in today's episode is like a brief overview of all the different things which I want to highlight for you, especially to get started with .NET 6. I hope by listening this podcast you will get some familiarity with what the .NET 6 is all about, and in addition to that, with the because of the support that it have with the C# 10 and as well as the new integration with the Visual Studio 2022, you can get a lot of additional features as well, which you can refer the documentation for more details. So like the different language constructs as well as the different options that you can have from the newest version of Visual Studio that you can learn from the documentation. But keep in mind that there is no mandatory requirement that you must use Visual Studio 2022 for creating a .NET 6 application. Some developers prefer the Visual Studio Code, and they are free to use that as well. So everything is supported, like the hot reload and all will be supported at all. But you will buy Visual Studio Professional or Community Edition based Visual Studio, you will get some additional features than Visual Studio. So if you are okay with that, or if you need that, you can check out the Visual Studio. So that is what I feel. Then the blogs which I suggested, like the announcing .NET 6 and the performance improvement with the .NET 6, you can refer to learn more about the different improvements. One of the striking improvement which I felt while working with the .NET 6 is like how cleaner the code is like. So with the file-based namespace and reduction of using statement itself, there is a lot of change. And in addition to that, if you know some of the newer C# language constructs, you can apply that to your code as well. So that means there would be a lot of more improvements that you can bring, or you can reduce your code to a great extent using this. Using the new C# 10 features. So some of the new C# 10 features are like which you can refer later in the documentation. One is the constant interpolated string. Then the async method builder attributes on different methods. So that is another one. Then the global using statement. So you can if you are using a common set of using statements, you can prefix that with a global that will be available across your project. Then the file scope namespaces is there. Earlier, you know that inside a class there will be a namespace that is wrapped, and inside that your actual class. So now with the file scoped namespaces, you can have a different way, like you can use it like a using statements with a semicolon, and you don't need your class wrapped inside your namespace at all. So this is a different way at all. So if you have an existing application with an older type file namespaces, you can simply highlight that and you can convert that to a file scoped namespace as well. Then there are other new features of C# 10 as well, which you can refer there. Refer from the documentation. So these all things are what I plan to cover in today's session, and I thank everyone for listening this podcast, and I hope you will be clear with some of the new features of what .NET 6 is. So once again, thank you for listening, and we will come up with another episode that features some other aspects of programming later. And on the upcoming Wednesday, that is 2 days later, I will be planning to have a session on the .NET 6, which is a live demo, which will be live streamed from my YouTube channel. If you want to watch that later, the recording will be available from my YouTube channel as well. So that features some of the concepts live in action, so that you can understand what's all going on there. Especially that new IntelliSense feature and how the Visual Studio looks like. So if you want to get a familiarity, you can check my YouTube channel for the .NET 6 session. In addition to that, I also have a lot of sessions which focus on different cloud services related to Amazon as well. So I am also a AWS community builder. So recently Amazon made me a community builder because of my contribution to different services that Amazon is developing. So that means that I will be able to learn more about the Amazon, and will be able to share some of the features. And also, if you are interested in learning more about the Amazon community builder program, you can check that on the Amazon documentation as well, so that you can understand, get a familiarity of what that particular program looks like. Especially it's helpful for developers to learn more about the platform, and you will get an access to a lot of internal resources inside Amazon, as well as the different other people who are involved with the Amazon technology. Likewise, I have also experience with the Microsoft platform as well, which I used to develop in my career. And so different way I will try to share my knowledge, and you can check my YouTube channel as well as my podcast as well. So once again, thank you everyone for listening this podcast. Have a great day ahead.